Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya, and I'm so grateful that you're here listening to this podcast episode. Would love for you to share this episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates. If you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes and so we can get this podcast out to the wider community. Today's guest is Lex Van Lynden. He is a renowned leadership coach and workshop facilitator dedicated to helping startup founders and teams improve communication, team dynamics, and performance. As a founder of CoachUp SG, he offers transformative workshops, including the DISC framework, NLP techniques, and leadership development, all designed to foster personal and professional growth. Lex's approach focuses on clarity, confidence, and creating high-trust teams. With a passion for impactful coaching, his sessions equip leaders to navigate challenges and drive sustainable success in the fast-paced startup environments. Let's welcome Lex to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Welcome, Lex.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and thanks for having me here. Super excited about it.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, and thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, you're welcome. Lex, could you tell us a little about your journey in life, like from childhood to where you are today and how you help people? It'd be good to understand who Lex was as a child, what challenges he went through, how did you overcome them, and then how did you get into coaching?
Yeah, that can go very deep very quickly. So I grew up in the Netherlands, had a fairly well-off childhood, had two older brothers, two younger brothers. And yeah, we didn't really have any real significant struggles as a family when we were younger. It all started, I guess, when I went to the one school and my brothers went to the other school, where I realized that I was somewhat different than their brothers, and more on that later. Let's see. Then I went to uni. Everything was just a very lazy student for a very long time, until someday I gave myself the proverbial kick up my ass. And that's when I started actually studying and getting grades. Then during the startup road, accidentally, I rolled into HelloFresh. I think it's also in New Zealand by now. And from there, I accidentally rolled into a similar company in Malaysia, and then into Thailand, and then into Indonesia, and now in Singapore. So the past 7 or 8 years have been all in high growth, early stage startups in Southeast Asia, and I guess that's who I was. Then who I became because of that, and the link to coaching, I think, is as a young graduate going into a startup, there is no formal leadership training. There's just a bunch of problems that an organization or a team has, and there's a bunch of solutions that you have to think of and then implement. And thinking of solutions is one thing, but being able to ready the people around you to implement that with you is a very different skill set. And some people are accidentally very good at it, and some people are not accidentally very good at it, and they need some coaching and some training. I was one of those people that was oblivious to the fact that I wasn't very good at it for a long time, until that one day when I realized, wow, I need to change some things here. And that's how I got into coaching later.
Yeah, it's all about repetition, right? The more you do it, the more competent you become. So Lex, could you share a little bit about your journey in leadership coaching?
A few years ago, I joined a fintech startup here in Singapore. It was amazing. Company was great, leadership was great, but growth was just incredibly fast. And that poses new challenges, right? Your team is growing and you have no idea how to handle it. Until one day, my now wife said, "You know what? I'm exploring doing some coaching courses. Would you be interested?" And she mentioned NLP, and I was like, "Wow, I've actually been interested in NLP for a very long time. Just never found the trigger to do it. So I figured, let's do this." And so I went to an NLP coaching course, and then later an ICF coaching course, and it was, in my mind, was expanded. And then I was like, "Wow, I need to share this with more people. I need to tell people, I need to show people, I need to bring people into approaching life from a different perspective and approaching work from a different perspective." And ever since, I've been coaching individuals, director, VP, sometimes C-level, on how to better communicate, how to problem solve, how to rally people around missions, how to deal with conflict. And that is incredibly rewarding because I can still see myself, my younger self, drowning in my earlier my earlier days of my career. And I would have killed for someone like me to help people to learn to swim.
Yeah, yeah. Were there any particular challenges that or experiences that shaped your approach to coaching?
Any particular that shaped my approach to coaching? Yeah, I think so. I started coaching when I was in Southeast Asia. And as a Dutch, we are known for being, well, let's call it direct. Other people would call it rude. And I think that what I learned from NLP is that people perceive the world through their own map of the world, which means we can see the same event, but we can interpret it completely different through our own internal filters and our values and beliefs. And I have just been imposing my values and my beliefs on each and every person for the longest time. And once I realized that, I figured, wow, that's just pretty crazy. So I go in with an extremely open mind, and really I don't want to touch or change or judge on however you see the world. So I think my experience of being all over the globe has really taught me to be very open to how other people think, feel, and do things. And I blend that a little bit with that Dutch directness in being a little bit more provocative and challenging at times, because sometimes people are just reluctant to go all the way, to go give themselves 100%. And I think that's where that Dutchness actually comes in quite handy.
Would like to know a little bit about the communication side of things. So what inspired you to focus on communication and team dynamics, specifically for startups?
I think in startups, what we often do, what the founders often do, right? They set a company and they've been incubating this company in their head for the longest time. There's this problem that needs to be solved, and around that problem originated a mission and a vision. And that's amazing. And the early people that join a startup are like, wow, I buy into the mission of the company, I buy into the leadership, and that's it. But as the company grows, people just get a job, right? They no longer feel that tied to the mission and the senior leadership. And I think that's where communication comes in. The communication, many different things, but one thing is to be able to break down the vision of a company, the vision of the founding level, to a bite-sized chunk that the associate new joiner can also understand. And I think that's something that doesn't happen in startups very often and very well. And as a result of that, what people started doing, they start interpreting that mission in their own way and start running left, whereas somebody else wants to go straight and somebody else wants to go right. And that then creates conflict and misaligned incentives. And then there's chaos, chaos everywhere, Anthony. So I see a lack of communication as a very fertile breeding ground for all sorts of problems. And having been there myself a few times, I figured this is where I want to focus on helping people.
Mm-hmm. So NLP plays quite a significant role in your approach to leadership. Could you explain why NLP is and why is it so effective in improving communication?
Yeah, sure. What is NLP? NLP is essentially a tool set for understanding how language and behavior and thought patterns interact. And it helps leaders to better understand how they and others process information, communicate, and make decisions. Now, why is it effective? It's not just about words. It's also how people frame their experiences. Like I just mentioned earlier, right? You and I can see the same thing, but have a completely different feeling about what we just saw, maybe even a different interpretation. And that is because we filter the experience through a set of unconscious patterns in our head that have been with us ever since we were young kids and shaped our mind. Understanding those filters that people have and your own helps you to become much more effective in communication. So it's really about empowering a leader to give them the tools to start managing people as an individual, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all technique. And I think that's why NLP is really helpful for communication and breaking down those communication gaps.
Yeah, we see that like in schools, we see that in workplaces, we see that where a particular curriculum or that everyone's supposed to understand the same thing, right? But in this diverse world, especially with divergence and so on, that one message or is not going to be taken by people in the same way. I remember when I was starting my coaching journey, we used to talk about the map is not the territory. If you gave
Exactly, yes.
everyone the same map, they would have a different perception of how to get to that destination, right? And they would see different things. So yeah, that's quite important. Where did you learn NLP, by the way, and how long did it take you to learn that?
I went to a coach training supplier provider in Bangkok. It was a 5-day course. It was very intense. It was from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. At the end of every day, I was more dead than alive, I think, but also enlightened and in high spirits.
Yeah,
It was really, really, really good. Coachology is their brand.
nice, nice. So could you share an example of how NLP has helped bridge communication gaps within a team?
Yeah, so I thought about this one for a second, and I realized there's this beautiful example of in NLP we call it meta programs, and meta programs are again right these unconscious filters and preferences of how we perceive the world and make our decisions. So because we perceive the world one way, we make our decisions. Obviously, it affects how we communicate, how we behave. So I think from the top of my head, NLP has like 8 or 12 meta programs, and they're like the most deeply embedded, let's go with software in your mind. And I was thinking about a team that I've worked with that had some conflict, and I've been observing them for a while. We've done some group coaching, and I couldn't really figure out what was the underlying issue until until it hit me. So I'm not going to go into every single meta program. I'm just going to briefly reference the three that mattered in this case. People are either toward or away from, and towards I'm motivated by a goal and I want to achieve a certain thing. And the opposite of that, away from, is I'm motivated by just not getting into problems. I do not want any negative outcomes. Um, and in this case, the team lead was an away from person. It was wanted to avoid issues. And most people in the team actually want to achieve certain things. Now, that was problem one. Problem two is the leader had an external frame of reference, wanted the big shot, the CEO, to validate he did a good job. And the team was like, we know what we have to do. We look at the data, we know where we want to go. And then to make it all worse, the team lead was a mismatcher. Now, I'm a mismatcher myself. There's nothing wrong with being a mismatcher. But what it means is that you seek out the differences and you challenge what you think is wrong, as opposed to looking at, hey, this aligns with this way of thinking, or I saw the other data point, this makes sense. So what happened is that actually the team wants to go forward in doing all these things based on their amazing ideas, but the leader was like, okay, I want the head honcho, the big boss, to be happy with my performance, and I try and avoid any problems. So what happened is that the team lead kept the team stable in one position without going forward, but actually underlying, if you look at all the NLP meta programs, the team members itself had a very different motivator. And that causes some issues. And then obviously, like, what do you do with it, right? And I think with all change, it honestly just starts with becoming aware of the fact that there are these differences. And then I took the team lead apart and I said, hey, so you seem to, it might be my hallucination, I might be wrong, but I hallucinate that you seem to stop the team from going into a lot of places. And then it was like, actually, you're right. And it's not just in work, it's also in our personal life, etc. And the breakthrough we had in that personal like 15 minutes unblocked the team completely, because once the leader became aware, he was able to drive the team forward as opposed to being afraid of judgment and being afraid of change. So yeah, that's one of the honestly one of the coolest NLP examples I could think of in unblocking a team using NLP
Mm,
principles.
mm, nice. And so how do you use NLP techniques to address unspoken aspects like body language or tone?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're really NLP techniques. It's just like if you see somebody like, oh, what are those body movements telling me there, Anthony? And just addressing the elephant in the room. I notice that you're shifting in your chair. If that shift could talk, what would it say? Because oftentimes our body makes so many movements, and we see so many. You can observe so many things when you take a closer look. But then our minds, our mouths, they say stuff that is completely misaligned,
Mm,
and you get away with it 90% of the time until somebody comes there with the objective of figuring out what is incongruent, and then then people just have to speak, right? Because if somebody asks you like, hey, what does that mean? Like, why is your leg twitching so much? Why are you looking away? Why are you always looking to the left of you when you have to say something? Oh, oh. So I think that's not necessarily just NLP. I think it's more on just being very focused on one's body language.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Are there any misconceptions people have about NLP and leadership, and how do you address them?
I think there's many, but I think the most common and the worst one is probably that NLP is manipulation. That's something I
Mm,
hear every now and then, and when I coach teams, I'm not gonna tell them beforehand, hey guys, we're gonna do some NLP coaching, because then they'll be like, what is that? And have more questions than answers that they're looking for. But in my opinion, NLP is not manipulative at all. It is just a bunch of tools that helps people to understand and unite people, as opposed to, as opposed to trying to divide them and be manipulative about it. So I think with everything, communication is just key. And sometimes not saying and not scaring people about NLP is also a good way to move forward, as
mm,
opposed to making things more complex than they are.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine that. So you would have to sort of kind of subtly do that, right? Rather than say, "Hey, we're going to do NLP today."
Yeah, exactly. Because there's when I focus on startups, and there's a lot of NLP practitioners and coaches that focus on other NLP interventions, and those can be a little bit freaky at times. And yeah, we're not going to do that in the corporate office. We're not going to help you change your triggers, etc. It can be done via NLP, but introducing that to a bunch of people that are at the office might not be the best approach to get them to buy in and do what's necessary.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Do you use that in your personal life at all?
I do a few things, and earlier you mentioned repetition. Repetitions make permanent, so I do really focus on my goal quite a lot, and I repeat it to myself. I do my incantation at least once a day. When I wake up, I tell myself my what would it be, my 12, maybe 14 line verse, that focuses me and grounds me in this moment. And also for moments I'm a little bit nervous about. So right before this call, I told myself, right, and then I do it. So those things are what I do, and what we do at home with myself and my wife. We do a lot of reframing, right? Because ultimately you feel the way you perceive something. And by putting that event in a different frame, we're able to feel better about it and move forward from things. So
Mm.
that's what we, I think, do. Yeah, that's one of the techniques we use a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's good practice, isn't it, to do it yourself and be able to see the results as well. Yeah. So you've worked with quite a few diverse teams across different cultures. How do you adapt your coaching to handle the different varied styles and cultural perspectives?
Yeah. So I think what I'm lucky enough to have lived in so many places, and I think that by itself sort of opened my mind to becoming more receptive of how other people feel and think and perceive the world. And I think for me the key lesson was when I just went to Malaysia. I Well, Anthony, I was not the nicest leader you could ever imagine. In fact, I would say I was a terrible leader, and I wasn't good to the people at all. And I think that is where I started to become much more in tune with, hey, how do people in this part of the world operate? How do they think about their leader, and how do they think about themselves? What are things they're desperately trying to avoid, and what are things that they will want to do? So I think with all those stuff, you can read books. The culture map one is one that really helps in understanding cultures. But ultimately, I feel something that is much deeper and much more important. And it's very simple. It's just listening, and then not listening for, hey, but I've got something to say, or I'm going to tell you. It's just listening. And even if you have nothing to say, that is even better, because ultimately people, whether they're from Botswana or from Zanzibar, it doesn't matter. We all want to be heard, and we all want to feel valued. And that's much more important than what culture you're from.
Yeah, and Simon Sinek talks about that. Giving space for other people to speak, and be the last one to speak, because then people are feeling like they're being involved, and also you're getting more information when you're listening as well. And so that's something that has been a big learning for me, because like for years I used to talk a lot, not listen, but doing these podcasts is for me is a perfect example of listening more and talking less.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna follow your lead. I'm also gonna do this one day, because I feel like it's a perfect way to learn so much more if you just shut up for a second and pay attention, right?
Absolutely. I've learned so much from doing these podcast episodes, because every person I talk to, I learn something new. Yeah. Could you give us an example of a situation where adapting to cultural differences helped improve the team dynamics?
Yeah, sure. So I guess this is the same, because it was for me a pivotal moment. So I'll just talk about the time in Malaysia. So I was hired there to set up a sales team, and right, I got pretty much like fresh off the boat, if you would say it that way. Just arrived in Malaysia, and I was like, okay, how am I going to run this team? So I set up an in-house field sales team, and then I just applied being Dutch, I guess, like being straightforward, being honest, being direct. Because where I come from, right, we don't really believe in hierarchy too much. We believe that honesty is important, and quick feedback. So as a result, churn was sky high, man. And I was like, why? Why are people afraid to speak up to me? And why is nobody challenging my ideas? And obviously, as a result, results weren't there until one day I was calling with my friend in the Netherlands. He was like, Lex, none of this sounds like you. So I started reflecting on the you part of that phrase, like, hey, what does sound like me? And that's when I realized, okay, I need to be more in tune, need to listen more. And instead of saying, no, that's a bad idea in a public meeting, I would say, oh, interesting, with the safe face. And then we would have that conversation one-on-one, and then not from the perspective of no, but hey, tell me, how did you come up with this idea? What do you think? What are the reasons for you to decide? And just being much more in tune with how people want to work, as opposed to imposing my real views and my set of beliefs and values. Just becoming aware of the fact that people have a very different upbringing, and stuff such as saving face and saying no in public. And in Malaysia, they say a lot like, yeah, can. It's like, okay, perfect. That means it's going to be done. Doesn't mean that at all. So then knowing that you have to follow up, and knowing that you have to ask a few more times, and ask for an action plan, for example, those stuff is really helpful. It helps them feel comfortable in their job. It makes them confident that they do the right thing. And I know then that it's going to happen. And I think those are some learnings of adapting to a culture, to make it more effective. And obviously that changes the entire game for how the team operates with each other. Because when the leader is satisfied, happy, the team feels more comfortable. The team feels more comfortable because the leader listens. They will speak more. They speak more. You learn more. You can help more. You can unblock more. So yeah, and this brings me back to the earliest question you asked, like, why communication? Because this is where the frustration and the conflict grows. But you can prevent all of it just by listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we've talked about NLP, but you also do DISC as well. how do they work together and support a better communication across teams?
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question. Uh, yeah, so I'm not entirely sure how familiar everybody is with DISC. So just very briefly, right? It says it's a circle. There's 4 fields. You're either what is it? Task oriented, people oriented, or not, right? And you're not people oriented and well, not task oriented either. So, for example, if you are task oriented and not people oriented, you will be more on the introverted side, and you just focus on getting stuff done and very analytical. Now that's a particular DISC profile, the blue energy. And if you were to combine that with NLP, I think that could be very, very powerful. So let's say somebody is that blue energy, and you know from your conversations with somebody that this person is let's say a visual person, meaning in NLP we say every person perceives the world through its 5 senses, and there's this dominant sense. That's the one that you use to sort of consume most of the information. Is your preferred way of consuming information in the world. Some people are auditory, other people are visual. Dogs definitely olfactory, want to sniff everything. So let's say this person is a visual person and is in the blue energy, loves analytics. So then instead of going to tell somebody, hey, 43% of this and that, person will be confused. So you would put it on a slide. Here's a nice looking graph with the same numbers, but then you communicate with that person in the way that that person prefers to communicate, which makes it so much smoother, because then people understand it instantly, as opposed to frustration on behalf of the sender of the communication. Why don't you understand this? This makes so much sense to me because I'm an auditory person. This makes sense. So yeah, I think those kind of things could be very, very helpful. Understanding the yellow energy, the more extroverted, influential, we call it the E of DISC. Right, they're same thing. If that person would be more of a feeling person, kinesthetics, then you would communicate much more on, well, if you say this, it makes me feel this way. And then, that triggers the emotion for that person. And then they exactly understand what makes you feel that way and why that's not a good feeling. And so I think they definitely cross-pollinate. Something to double down on, I guess. That's a great idea, Anthony, to combine them, because usually we do them very separate. But that's a good idea.
Often the tools can be combined, because they give you different perspectives of the person. It's not, you're not just looking at it in a particular, just one way, but you're kind of looking at it from different perspectives. So yeah, I would love to see that work together.
Same.
And see how it works.
Same.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
Absolutely. Maybe we can do another podcast on how they worked.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about trust. I think trust is quite a fundamental step, and it's quite important because it's the first step to building. If you don't have trust, then you have nothing, right? And often in leadership, a lot of leaders don't have the trust of their people. So in your experience, what are some of the core elements that foster trust within a team, especially in a fast-paced startup environment?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess for me, like there's 2 types of trust, right? It's trust between the teammates, and there's trust in the leadership of the leader. I think for the leader to be trusted, I think there's be willing to support and solve problems, willing to listen and adapt the style to match whatever the teammate is mentioning. So I think that is very important for the leader to get the buy-in from the team. And for the team members, it's and obviously right, that would be from how the team member feels about the team lead, but the team lead also doesn't want to be blindsided by upcoming events that they don't know about, right? As humans, we value security, safety, just like Maslow said a long ass time ago, and part of that is knowing that you're not going to have a knife in your back from your team or anyone else. So it's very important to reciprocate that openness and communicate proactively about upcoming potential issues, even though there's not an issue yet, but potential. And I think that creates a lot of trust, right? That proactive communication. There we have that word again, because that is ultimately what keeps us feeling safe in our environment. So I think, yeah, so I guess communication, supporting your team members, listening, and the willingness to adapt after somebody told you something that they feel uncomfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So can you share a success story where you've been able to move from sort of conflict to sort of more cohesive action?
Yeah, so this is, I did it a very long time ago, even before I started coaching. This was in one of my teams in the Netherlands, where obviously we had we were series, I think series A, series B, and we were just expanding to different countries, and it was chaos. And that led to conflict. And as a result of that, we were often at odds with each other, not for a lack of resources, but for, I guess at some point it just turned into, we didn't even dislike each other. It's just that we were triggered. And so what do? We can't just always be fighting each other. So but we got into a room, and it sounds weird, but actually it makes sense. And we wrote down sort of the rules of engagement. Like, hey, we're going to have a conflict. What are the rules we are going to adhere to, and what are the red lines? Just like you would see in international law. And I feel uncomfortable if you would say these kind of things. Okay, let's no longer do personal attacks. And then basically what you then create is an environment in which conflict can be productive, as long as we make sure that we adhere to those rules. So we did it with the three of us.
You're setting some standards
right?
down, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's weird. Like, hey, Anthony, so how do you like your conflict? I like it. I like it when it comes unexpected and fast. So yeah, that's a little bit of a weird conversation to have. So we sat down, we wrote this with the three of us, and then we sort of voted on what is a good rule and what is not a good rule, and then that would be our Bible for conflict. But by doing that, we allowed everybody to feel more comfortable with conflict, and then conflict can be much more productive as opposed to just spiraling around the same topic. Conflict for the purpose of conflict, no longer focusing on the results. So I think that was pretty good. It was a good change for our team. Really helped moving us forward.
That's great. I'm not sure if I've heard that anyone do that before. Yeah. Well, what do you think?
You heard it there first, Anthony.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think is, and that would be one of the steps, like practical steps for leaders, right? But what other steps do you think leaders could take to create a more high trust environment when they're leading under pressure?
I think it's just especially for new leaders. Often what happens is that if you're a new leader, you get a little bit of extra ego, and that ego is not helping you at all. That ego is actually preventing people to want to help you and to want to work with you. So I think that's one very clear one. The other one is just keep people informed, especially when pressure is on. People still do not like to be blindsided. They still want to know what's coming. They still want to feel safe, and they want to feel included. So keeping people informed, I think, is honestly just a way to hold people together.
What are some of the steps that the leaders could take when they're in that sort of under pressure?
So obviously it depends a little bit on the type of pressure, right? If it's the usual startup pressure where it's like, hey, we want more numbers, then it's important to create accountability, because ultimately the leader often feels like they're carrying the entire team, just because they're the one communicating the numbers. But ultimately the people within the team are responsible for their results. And without addressing those things properly and measuring those things properly, you create kind of a culture of, is unaccountability a word? Well, unaccountability. And
lack of accountability. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So that would make it much worse, because if everybody does a little bit, the team will thrive. But if people do not feel that accountability to the leader or to each other, or there's no clear measurement, that's when the pressure really gets up, because the numbers do not come. And then people start justifying why they didn't do something, and blame sets in, and it's a whole new bucket load of problems. But I think for a leader leading a team under high pressure, it's set accountability, communicate proactively, keep your ego at home, and listen. Listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of the ego is not always a bad thing, right? It's how you use your ego, right? Because the ego can do good or bad. Yeah.
Yeah, when I'm referring to the ego here, I'm not referring to the good, I'm referring to the King Kong ego. Look at me standing on top of the mountain being a kick-ass boss because I'm the boss, as opposed to look at me being a helpful person for my team and lead them to success.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, I've just come out of, I've spent over the last 4 years in local government, come out of 2 organizations, been made redundant twice. And both times the communication's been terrible. The leadership has been secretive in terms of the decisions that are being made. Even when feedback was being given, they didn't really provide the feedback information properly, which caused a lot of uncertainty for people, and especially people who've been there for a very long time. I mean, I'd only been there for 6 months, but I noticed that the communication was very poor, and some really amazing people have had to leave their roles, and some of these people were like almost in tears because they really wanted to stay and make a difference. So what would you say in a change process like that, where or restructuring, what would you say is key to building that trust, and also for the leader to be accountable?
First of all, sorry to hear that. That's obviously terrible, especially with the lack of communication, lack of trust, and untransparent decision making. And I think that's also the root of a lot of these problems. If we don't communicate properly and clearly about what and why and how, then people will find in the universe the most unlikely reason or unlikely scenario, but the worst scenario there is. And that's what we're going to think about. And we're going to think about that scenario and only that. And we're going to apply that scenario on the person delivering the message. We say, you are this because of that, or, oh, they didn't tell me, so that must mean, and then there's this unlikely but very painful scenario. And I think that's it. As long as you're able to communicate, then you take away a lot of the unnecessary emotion. Yes, there will still be emotion because still people go through a big setback in their life and their planning, but at least they don't have to think of the worst possible reason and take that emotion into them. And I think that's one of the things that could definitely be done better. Your other part of your question on how the leader can create accountability in this particular case. Well, first of all, I'm very happy I haven't dealt with that. How would I coach a leader that has to go through that and take that accountability for it? I think as a leader, in this case, it would be very important to be empathetic, and then not like we're sorry, but actually empathetic, right? Sit with people, talk with people, take the time, because ultimately it's people that have feelings and thoughts, and if you're the one delivering the message and you're the one that come up with the plan, I think it's also time for that person to step up and go through the process, as opposed to hiding behind an email or behind a screen and then taking your fat BMW home again later. But that's it. It's about being human with human. As long as if we don't see laying off people as a task of laying off, but we see the people that are being laid off, then that's what we should do. We should look at them as people and interact with them as people.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you hit a nail on the head in terms of empathy, and what I've witnessed is that there is not a lot of empathy, and they will say, hey, you can come and talk to me, but then people are scared to go up, right?
Yeah.
And I think leaders need to be more forward and saying, "Hey, I'd really love to have a chat with you," and and I know that maybe through the leadership team manager or whatever, be able to communicate to a general manager or something like that, and then for that general manager to then say, "Hey, let's go and have a coffee and let's have a chat," and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, "Hey, you can come into my office whenever," that is missing out on the whole power dynamic, because you should be the one going to the other person, because that person is very unlikely to come into your office and say, "Hey, I'm here for that chat that you promised me via email." No, it's your job as a leader to take all of that ego away and go and talk with the person as if it's an actual real person,
Mm,
as opposed to
mm,
expecting them to make a move.
yeah. And while we're talking on leadership, like to me, a leader is a visionary, someone has a vision, who is empowering, who really cares about their people, because leaders are not successful by themselves. The people are the
Yeah.
ones that make leaders successful, right? And often leaders are the ones that get all the glory and the kudos. But the thing is, it's the people behind the scenes that are doing all that hard work and really making that leader look great. So um, leadership is not just about managing tasks. It's about also inspiring and engaging with your team. How do you help leaders develop that ability to inspire?
Yeah. So we offer a leadership coaching package in which we actually try and get people to become better leaders, and then we don't focus on managing tasks. We focus on that part, getting people to want to follow you. And for us, the first step is actually about defining who you want to be as a leader, because we don't think that if Anthony, if somebody comes to you and say, "Hey, we are going to make an authoritative leader out of you," then you'll be like, "Oh, but that's not who I want to be." And if you're at odds with yourself, people will see that. People will not follow a fake guy. So step one for us is to sit down and sort of write that leadership vision. What kind of leader do I want to be? And then we start making that into we break that down into smaller goals. Hey, what do you need to learn on communication? What do you need to learn on building trust? And then we go through that process. So we find, where are you now? Where do you want to be? And where now, where you want to be? And then based on that, we start coaching and helping people to get there. But I think the most important thing is it needs to be somebody. The leadership vision you have needs to be something that comes from you and you alone. Because if you're not, you're going to be unable to inspire. You're going to be unable to lead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
we all know that guy in primary school or high school that all of a sudden turned into like this different person because it saw a movie or something. And then we kind of stopped hanging out with that guy because he was not real to himself, and that still happens. And
Mm,
especially in startups where people don't get this formal training of becoming a better leader, they would just mimic a television character, but it's not convincing.
mm, yeah. So the other question I had around was self-awareness, which is quite important. And there's so many people walking around unconsciously, right? So how does self-awareness play in being an effective, inspiring leader?
Yeah. So before all of these NLP and ICF training courses, I think I did some stuff on becoming more aware of myself, but it only happened once I went through NLP that I really became aware of myself. And I think I started realizing my patterns and how I interact with people and how that demotivates some at time, right? Instead of looking on why something is the correct way and sort of steering it into an even better way, I would say this, and this is wrong. And that then demotivates. So becoming aware of how you operate and doing something about it, because that's obviously the other part of it, helps you empower your team members. And I think that's the part what we try to achieve with inspiration, right? We try and empower and get them to go 10 times more effective. Um, and that and change only starts with you. What is the old saying? Be the change you want to be in the world.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. But you need to become aware of what you need to change. So self-awareness is honestly, it's the key to transform an entire team if the right person becomes self-aware. If you are let's say a digital marketing specialist with 0 to 3 months of working experience and you join a big corporate team, then obviously you're not the one who's going to change it. But if that team lead becomes aware, then the entire team will transform.
And so if nothing changes, nothing will change. So change, you gotta change to be able to be effective as a leader.
Yes.
How can leaders use NLP techniques to understand and influence their team members and perceptions?
I kind of referenced this earlier, the 5 senses of how we perceive the world. And I think that's a very clear one, right? So instead of having a one-on-one with your team member where you are not writing anything down and you don't have any visual cues, you're basically relying on your own auditory sense of processing information. And I think it's very important to understand for your team members what is their preferred, let's call it learning style, or their preferred sense, and double down on it. Because ultimately, as a leader, what you want to do is you want to get your people to do things more efficiently. And that also means that if you are communicating with them in a way that's easier for them to process information, you're already making a big step. You're avoiding a lot of pitfalls of misunderstanding, miscommunication. So I think that's a very easy way to empower, to use some NLP techniques to understand your team members' perceptions much better. Because obviously it goes the other way around as well.
So would you say that would also be the advice you'd give startup founders who want to be more effective in motivating their teams during challenging times? Is there anything else that you would say to them?
I think there's I think the most effective marketing campaigns are the campaigns that Obama did, which have one word: change, or improve, or whatever it was. And that is so big picture that anybody can feel relating to that mission of change. And I think that's part one of the startup founder, right? Making the mission and the vision inspiring, but it also needs to be manageable in the day-to-day. So in order for your mission to actually be something people can work towards, you will need to chunk it into smaller bits and pieces of information that people with a different role or cognitive ability or experience can understand. So you want to change. Okay, that's very broad. What do you mean exactly? Okay, so this is important for the VP level. Okay, what is important for their teams? Chunk it down to that level so that they can effectively communicate your mission over different levels, as opposed to getting that misalignment somewhere along the line. I think that's honestly one of the most important things that we've come across so far.
Cool, thank you for that. All right, Lex, we are at the 5 quick-fire questions point now of this interview. So you can answer with one word or a short sentence, whatever you prefer. First question I have is around, how do you define success, and has that definition changed for you over time?
Changed massively. How do I define now happiness? In the past, it was about success, undefined by myself, but defined by others.
Who's been your greatest inspiration and why?
My father. Without words, without ever actively addressing it, he instilled a lot of drive and energy and passion in me. And that's been my driving force so far.
That's great. Yeah. What is something that you believe in that others may disagree with?
Conflict can be very good.
Yeah, I'm sure most people would disagree with that. Yeah. If you go back to give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Believe in yourself much more than you do now.
Yep. And I'd add to that and say, back yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. last thing, what is one message that you would like to share with the world?
Be kind. Honestly, just be kind. Just treat people as people, and that solves 99% of any problem in the world, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Lex, this has been a great interview. If people would like to get in touch with you, whether it's coaching or just have a chat, how can they get hold of you?
Well, they can find me on either LinkedIn. I'm quite active there, Lex Van Lynden, or on coachup.sg. Contact details are there. You can email to info@coachup.sg or directly to lex@coachup.sg.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll put the links into the podcast description so that people can get in touch with you. Do you have any programs or anything that you're giving away at the moment that you'd like to also promote?
We currently do not give anything away. So what kind of programs do we run? We run programs on creating a high performance team. We do a lot of coaching in the startup, DISC as well. And we are going to launch, and that's very exciting, in Europe in February. We're going to launch our first ICF approved leadership coaching training. So in 4 days, we are going to train people to become leadership coaches. And those people will receive a certificate from the International Coaching Federation.
Nice. That's awesome.
We have a 20% early bird discount. We do have an offer.
There we go. There we go. So there you go. If you want to be a leadership coach, hit up Lex and he'll give you all the information. We'll put the links to that as well. So if you've enjoyed this podcast episode and you've got some insights out of this, make sure to share this with your friends, your family, and your workmates. And if you haven't already done so, please follow or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes and we can get this out to the wider community. And remember, you are loved and you are worthy. And I want to remind you to champion your life and champion your greatness. Have an amazing day.